Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and in this channel we look at microfiche from all over the world, from the past, and they are all newspaper articles in the public domain that are interesting to us today, and looking at them from our modern perspective and seeing what we can learn from the past. So, in today's Microfiche time capsule, we are looking at the London Magazine of 1768 in August, and this is an article entitled "The Late Marriage Act Considered." I'm kind of looking forward to this one because I think that there will be lots of relatively modern information that we can look at, and that considering that the definition of marriage has changed so much since 1768. Let's see why it was so controversial then. So, just to let you know that there are letters in this article because at the time the letter S looked like an F. It is just part of the time. Things change over time, and that's what it looked like then. So, just to warn you, let you know, you'll see what I mean in a moment. Mr. Urban. Now, these articles are addressed to Mr. Urban because a person named Severus Urban put together this newspaper. I don't think that was his real name. It sounds like a nom de plume. Okay, moving on. Mr. Urban, the late act concerning clandestine marriages has given great offense to many serious persons, and must, I think, in some particulars be much disapproved by all persons who have any knowledge of mankind, or have studied the law of nature or the scriptures, or have considered only the ends for which matrimony was ordained. So I found that very interesting, the ends for which matrimony was ordained. Like, you have a specific purpose in marrying. Like, and honestly, the way that was done in Britain at the time, I've read Jane Austen, and there was a lot of money changing hands in marriage. So is that what they mean by the ends for which it was ordained? I kind of doubt it. Let's keep going. Whether these things were considered by any who were concerned in framing this act, or whether they were principally influenced by secular considerations, themselves only know. However, the world will be apt to form a judgment of their motives from some clauses in the act, which cannot, I think, possibly be defended upon the principles of the law of nature, or the gospel, but appear diametrically opposite to both. Laws of nature, huh? Like, considering that we now have gay marriage be legalized, I sincerely doubt it was that scandalous. It's interesting what was scandalous at different times of the world, yeah? The many scandalous, precipitate, and unhappy matches that are made, and especially in the metropolis of this kingdom, are grounds of very just complaint, and ought by all possible, legal, and honest means be discouraged. Okay, so don't have bad marriages. I don't think that most people can predict whether or not their marriage is going to be good or bad, because people change over time, and whether they change for the better or for worse is really up to them, now isn't it? But this grievance, though very great, and which has long called for redress by inflicting severe penalties upon all, whether clergy or laity, that shall be concerned in making or forwarding such marriages, cannot, I think, justify the dissolving any marriage, or marriage contract that shall be entered into with deliberation by persons of ripe age, or fit for the marriage state, and who are supposed to understand the nature of a vow or covenant, notwithstanding the consent of parents on either side be withheld. So it cannot, I think, justify the dissolving of any marriage or marriage contract that shall be entered into with deliberation. I disagree. There are definitely reasons for dissolving a marriage or marriage contract when you find out more information about a person, or when they do something that is not acceptable to you, whether that be infidelity or tricking you into things, or abuse. Like, there are lots of reasons to end a marriage, and I completely disagree with this statement. So is that the Marriage Act that they're referring to? What is the practice of Holland or any other nation in this case, or what was anciently the practice of many states or kingdoms, ought to have no weight at all with any person, who will be determined by the law of nature and the gospel, rather than by the laws of particular nations, which are framed, it is well known, upon mere reasons of state or temporal considerations. Yeah, I completely disagree with that statement. Like what other countries do does affect us, and it's also interesting to watch what other countries do and allow, and how it's dealt with by normal ordinary people, because there are normal ordinary people in all countries. So if you see, for example, to modernize that gay marriage is now allowed in certain countries, and that it didn't overthrow the government, and that it didn't stop people from having children, and things that people were concerned about before that. So in this case, what they're saying is that it sounds like in Holland they had this already in place before England ratified it. So they're saying that it should have no weight at all with what we do in our country, because that's their country and it's not our country. But as I said, everything we do affects everything. So I disagree with that. Okay. That parents ought to be obeyed by their children of whatever age, in all things lawful, and in things not only commanded by God, but in things agreeable to his will, admits of no dispute, okay? For it is a precept of the gospel. Yeah, 100% disagree with that. As someone who has parents who wanted something other than what I wanted, as I think most people have, I can honestly say, no, my parents are not allowed, I am not required to obey my parents. I would have made many different decisions if I had. After you're an adult, if you're an adult, then you no longer are under the thumb of your parents. You're not required to obey them. And it's interesting that back then you still were. As long as your parents were still alive, you were required to obey them. Imagine what a miserable existence that would be for some people who had really difficulty in domineering parents. Like, I feel really bad for them. That's crazy. But the authority of parents cannot extend to the hindering their children, who are of an age fit for the marriage state, and who are inclined to marry, from entering into that state. Yeah, agree with that. Once you are of age, you are allowed to get married. That's the end of that statement. For if they are inclined to marry, their constitutions so requiring, it is then not a matter of indifference whether they marry or not, but it is their duty that they should enter into that state which was ordained for a remedy against sin, and to avoid fornication, that such persons as have not the gift of continence might marry, to keep themselves undefiled members of Christ's body. That's why you think people get married? Is so they can have sex? Legally, I guess. I guess that was the case then. Yeah, people don't care about that now, but people still get married. I guess there are some people who care about that, but it's just interesting that that was such, like, in the minds of most people, that was why you got married. It's like everybody knew if you got married, it was to have sex. Like, that's kind of strange to me. Anyway. Whatever is made a matter of duty by the supreme lawgiver, in that case, the will or law of man ought not to interfere, whether it is right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God judge ye. Acts 4:19. A matter of duty. So now you're saying that you get married in order to have sex, and that you are now have a duty to have sex, and that's a little weird. No offense. Whether or not a couple has sex is completely between the two of them. And if you are married, you are under no obligation to have sex. By the way, that is actually a falsehood. So I really love that we know this today. I feel really bad that they didn't know that then. That was considered an obligation. Like, wow. The act declares that if the consent of guardians or of the mother to a proper marriage shall unreasonably be withheld, the parties desirous of marriage may in that case apply to the Lord Chancellor who shall judicially declare the proposed marriage to be proper, if upon examination it appear so to be, and such declaration shall be as effectual to all intents as if the guardians or mother had consented. Okay, so if you want to get married to somebody and your mother objects, you're allowed to go to, like, what is it called, the Lord Chancellor, whatever that is, like some sort of person in charge, I guess, like a judge, who will then decide whether or not that's okay for you to marry that person if you're old enough. If you're not related to them, I'm assuming, then it would be okay. Yeah, why not? And it said it would be just as good as if your mother or guardian had consented. I'm like, yeah, that sounds good to me. That sounds reasonable. But if the father withhold his consent, there is no remedy, no appeal from him. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so if the mother objects, then you can get it repealed by a person. But if the father objects, then you can't? His authority in this case is final. Wow. Oh, the patriarchy. It is here supposed that the guardians or mother may be lunatic or want their reason, oh my gosh, or in foreign parts, or may unreasonably withhold their consent. So they're saying, oh my gosh, they're saying women are unreasonable or may be crazy. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and men can't be, right? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. In all these cases, the parties may have a remedy by application to the Chancellor if the proposed marriage appeared to him to be proper. So, but only if the mother objects. Oh my gosh. But why must not these circumstances, which admit of an appeal from guardians or the mother, allow of an appeal from the father, when they happen to be his case, which may very well be supposed? Shall his authority be absolute or final in anything that is not indifferent, especially in the important case of the marriage of his children, whether he has lost his reason or not? Let me read that again. Shall his authority be absolute or final in anything that is not indifferent, especially in the important case of the marriage of his children, whether he has lost his reason or not? So it doesn't matter if your father is crazy. He has the final say in whether or not you're allowed to marry the person you want to marry. Is this for girls as well as boys as well as girls? Like, if your son wants to marry someone you don't approve of, is this also the case? I know women were very, very much controlled. So a girl would have to ask her father permission to get married. But did his son as well? I'm not sure. But honestly, like, you have to listen to your crazy father because he's crazy, whether you like it or not. Like, that's insane. I can't believe that. A wife and religious father who consults the happiness of his children and makes the law of God and reason the rule of his conduct ought undoubtedly to be advised with by his children before they marry, though they are above the age wherein the law requires the consent of the parents. Yeah, well, that's like the ideal case now, isn't it? I mean, if you, if you have good parents who want what's best for you, then of course, then you should consult them first and, talk to them about who you're interested in, and you have a really good relationship with them. That's great. That's the ideal. That is not the case in all families, so there really ought to be a contingency plan here. And such a man will never withhold his consent from any proper marriage, but such only as he judges likely to prove unhappy. But do all fathers answer this description? Excellent question. Yeah. On the contrary, it is notorious that the principal, if not the only point which may have in view and insist on, is opulence, or family, or title, in the matches they consent to for their children, while other qualifications, though of far greater importance and essentially necessary for the happiness of the marriage state, enter very little into their thoughts. That's exactly what I saw in Jane Austen novels. I know they're novels, but they are very much steeped in the traditions and culture that it came from, which was around this time. It was actually later than this. In case you're putting it into perspective, Jane Austen novels were written in the early 1800s. This is 1768. This is pre-Jane Austen. So, but it's the same sort of idea, is that you have this family or title or money. Yeah, it's all about the money. It's all about the title. It's all about the land that people got married back then. And somebody had to be on their own level, quote unquote. So the question is, would the father really always look to the happiness of their children, or are they looking to the state of their bank account? I mean, that's a great question. Covetousness, therefore, or pride or ambition, have much the principal part in disposing of their children in marriage. A suitable or advantageous match with respect to family or fortune should indeed be no objection, if other circumstances of far greater consequence be right. Yeah. So they're saying, like, well, that once again, this is the ideal case, if you have two people from the same or similar background that want to get married, then, everybody should be all for that. Or if you are marrying up, so to speak, everybody's happy with that. The question is, what happens in the other direction? But where such a stress is laid upon either of these as to exclude all other considerations, either of the moral character or temper or health or proper age of either party, there it is very evident that religion or a sense of right or a desire of the happiness of their children are entirely out of the question. Let me read that again, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. But where such a stress is laid upon either of these as to exclude all other considerations, either of the moral character or temper or health or proper age of either party, there it is very evident that religion or a sense of right or a desire of the happiness of their children are entirely out of the question. So basically it's like we're looking at cases where it's not the ideal, yeah? Where they are, I love how they mention health, temper, moral character, and proper age. Like, those are all extremely important considerations. The proper age. Let me say that again. Proper age. Oh my goodness. It's usually girls, let's be honest. Let the girls grow up first. Don't marry them off at age 12. Please. Ever. Back then, it was not that strange. It did sometimes happen that women got married at age 12. I say women, that's a girl. That is a child. Moral character means, like, do they go out and cheat on you all the time? I mean, that's a great question. Temper, are they going to beat you to death when you get home? Health, are they mentally sound? I mean, that's what I've immediately thought of. Other kinds of health I don't think should be a consideration in marriage. I think that physical health, as long as the person is sound of mind and able to get married, then there's no reason why someone who is severely disabled or has some sort of chronic illness should not be allowed to marry. So I don't feel like health in general. I feel it's more of the mental state of a person, if they are of sound mind and are able to make those kind of decisions, or are they so severely mentally disabled that they're not able to consent to a marriage. That would be my concern when they're talking about health. I don't think that physical health should play that large of a role. In that case, that any of those things are not in line with the happiness of your child, they ought to be something you're considering, and that most people they find do not consider that, and that they're not considering the happiness of their children, and that just goes completely out the window, and they're out of the question. And I think that is true. And it is something that we need to watch out for our children in general. And I have told my children that I don't care who you marry, what they look like, where they're from, that kind of thing. But what all I care about is how they treat you. Are they kind to you? Yeah? Moral character, temper, health, proper age. Proper age is not as much of a problem today, but yeah, like, be an adult before you get married, please. Please. Ugh. Oh, man. It is no uncommon case to oppose a match even when there could be no objection to birth or fortune, but both have exceeded all just pretensions merely because a covetous father would not part with his money for a settlement. Oh, geez. So they're saying that fathers will sometimes not allow it because they have to, like, what is it, pay for a dowry or something? And when a marriage has been entered into where an express consent in writing has been wanting, though he has connived at and even appears to encourage the match, it has been made a pretense for withholding a fortune or settlement, and disobedience has been alleged as a colorable reason for distressing a child. So it's like there have been times when the parents, and particularly the fathers, have even encouraged a child to be interested in someone else and said, oh yeah, you two would make a great couple, that kind of thing. And then, withdraws his approval or refuses to give it in writing so they couldn't get married legally, and then think it's strange that the child is now disobeying him. Duh, you completely encouraged that one. Well done to them. Here we go. This is going to be controversial with today, I think. Okay. As to the age when children or young persons should be at liberty to marry, since this is nowhere determined by any law of God, neither ought it to be determined by any law of man. Yeah, I disagree. We can totally set a minimum age. Oh my gosh. The persons themselves are the only competent judges in this matter. I disagree. If a child is too young to make rational decisions, they shouldn't be getting married. St. Paul's instructions in this case are very plain. To avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and every woman her own husband. Every man has his proper gift of God, one after this manner, after another after that. If they cannot contain, speaking of married persons and of widows, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. 1 Corinthians 7? Yeah. Oh my gosh. So they're saying that that's slightly disgusting. So what they're saying is that you let your children marry regardless of their age if it will keep them from having sex outside of wedlock. That's what I'm hearing here. Yeah, disagree. Big fat disagree. Teach your children to be safe. Don't force them to get married at age 12. Please don't do it. When persons under the age of 21, at which the age the consent of parents is not made necessary by the act, before which age their consent is made necessary to the validation of the marriage covenant, are in the circumstances the apostle speaks of, his exhortation is to let them marry. His address is to both unmarried persons and to widows. Okay, so I did not know that you had to be 21 in England at the time before you could be married without the consent of your parents. That kind of sucks. Wow, parents had so much power over their children then. He put no supposition of any human authority or laws which should hinder such marriage, nor mentions any accepted case. If they cannot contain, if they have not command over their inclinations to continue chaste in the single state, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. I'm going to skip that because you already know how I feel about that. Don't force your children to get married, please. Whatever inconveniences may attend the marriage state, it ought to be chosen rather than lustful inclinations which cannot otherwise be lawfully gratified. I agree. Because you should choose to get married. It should be a choice, and it should not be just so you can have sex legally. I don't care what religion you are. That should not be why you get married. As it is plain from hence that no human authority can lawfully prevent or discourage the marriage of such persons as are inclined to marry, of what age ever they be. Oh my gosh. Oh, what age soever they be. If fit to enter into that state, so there is no authority upon earth that can lawfully void or annul such marriage as had the deliberate consent of the married parties, and was solemnized by a mutual vow, and giving and pledging their troth to each other. I am yours, etc., XYZ. And this kind of goes against one of the Jane Austen books. I mean, in Pride and Prejudice, the 15-year-old got married without consent of the parents. And I think that's possibly why it wasn't immediately legal. They had to have the written permission of the parents in order to get married, whereas Elizabeth did not because she was already 21. That's interesting to me. But Lydia did, and that's why she was living in sin, so to speak, with her boyfriend, and who had never intended to marry her until he got what he wanted, which was promised to be supported by her family. Lovely guy. No, sorry, I am not a fan of that character, and he's probably my least favorite character from the Jane Austen's books. Although I've read like 5 of them, so it's not the only one I've read. Good books, though. I think most people will be familiar with that story. But that explains kind of why they were not married yet, and why Lydia was so excited about getting married and was so sure it would happen, because they'd already been living as man and wife. And so she was forcing her parents to consent. But I don't know why she ever thought they wouldn't have in the first place. They probably would have. It would be perfectly fine for her to marry a soldier. So if she had just been patient and waited a little bit, then she would have been able to get married in a normal way instead of running off with him and, basically running away from her family. Like, that's just my opinion on that one. But, I feel like what really makes me feel very weird about this article is that they do not have a minimum age that it is legal to marry. Yeah, marry without consent of your family, 21. Before that, as long as you have permission from both of your parents, you can get married at any flippin' age you want, and that's crazy to me. That's crazy. Like, I go back to the age of 12, but this is like the traditional age where girls start to hit puberty, or have already hit it, most of them. And so it's considered like you're now a woman because you have your period. I cannot imagine getting married that young. Like, can any of my viewers imagine something like that? Like, that's crazy to me. I can't even believe that. And it was so very common back then. In fact, most women were married by the age of 18. It was unusual for you to be over 20 and still be unmarried. I'm slightly speechless, and I think that this is a crazy, crazy article. It's obviously very overly religious for us today to look at, because this is more of a civic kind of a conversation, and they've brought religion into the question. So it's not really a religious question now, is it? It's more a question of what are the laws of the land. And in this case, they had crazy laws that had no minimum age for getting married. I'm sorry, I'm very stuck on that one. I do appreciate that parents can have a good influence on their children, and it can really work, and I really hope that that is the case with most families. However, I don't feel like that is the case with most families. I feel like, you're a different personality than your parents. Your parents are, I can't imagine my parents needing my parents' permission to get married. It borderlines on the arranged marriage side of like, here, pick somebody out for me. I don't want my parents to pick my partner, and I never want them to, because that's between me and my partner and not between me and my parents. And how well my parents understand me will also depend upon how open they are as people, and whether or not they're able to keep an open mind and think about what I need and what what would make me happy in choosing a partner? Or are they just thinking what they want, which is someone to support them in their old age? I think that that's a very normal desire. At the same time, I don't think that that's the way partners should be chosen for children. And I'm very much afraid that that was the way partners were chosen for children back then, a lot. It's so crazy to me, especially since like the culture of the time was basically to get engaged after you'd only seen each other 2 or 3 times. It makes me glad I'm not some sort of aristocracy where you were just met at the wedding. No. Oh man, I can't even imagine that. Can't imagine. I'm so glad that our culture and laws are different today than they were then. Yeah. I'm very, very glad that we have come so far and so many more things are possible. It's possible for women to own land. It's possible for women to vote. Thank you. It's possible for women to work. It's possible for women's consent to be important, which unfortunately it wasn't so much then. I also wonder slightly how many marriages back then were made, even though probably the woman did not consent herself. Although it could also happen to a man as well. Where they're just said, oh yeah, this is somebody for you. Go ahead and talk to them and, get comfortable around them because you're going to get married. I think a lot of children could have been steamrolled into that situation. And I think that many of them were. So thank you, all of our ancestors, for fighting for our liberties. And I really appreciate all of your work for all of the rights that I now enjoy. Once again, I'm Micah, and thank you for joining us today on Microfiche Microphone. Please join us again another time, and we'll see you in the next video.